Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. We've got here a very windy and sunny day. I drove over the bridge in our local town and there were some pretty big waves rolling into the shore. And that got me thinking I would do a video that would talk about my favorite baits on those types of days. Because honestly, I actually really like to fish these days. They can be kind of grueling to do when you're riding around in 2 and 3 foot waves, but they set the fish up in a really good manner. And if you're using the right baits under those situations, it can be really good. So I'm talking specifically about those days where you've got the 2 to 3 foot chop, like really big rollers that are moving into a bank. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be that much, but I want a nice, strong, stiff wind that's actually causing some mud lines on the bank. It's causing some good areas where you're going to have current that's being generated from that wind. Maybe it's coming off a point, maybe it's being funneled through an island and the shoreline. You're just looking for those key transition points that are going to set the fish up. And the wind, even though it's a pain in the butt to fish, can be really good. It can really set those fish up in very specific situations, and it can also rile up the bait fish that gets the fish into a good feeding mode. So when you're talking about these days where you have that wind that's blowing into the bank, a lot of times what generally happens is those fish that were holding tight to cover can no longer hold tight to cover. So if you had, say, a dock or a stump, if that fish were to sit right next to that stump, the water motion would actually push that fish into it. So your key pieces of structure, those real specific targets, generally are not nearly as good unless they're good enough where the fish can actually sit behind them and get out of the wave structure. So maybe you've got a really big boulder, something that's bigger than that, something that's actually more like 6, 10 feet across where the fish can kind of sit behind it. Generally speaking, though, those fish are going to pull away from the cover. Now, the good thing about that is it means that you're no longer fishing very specific pieces of structure. And a lot of times what happens is those fish will pull out to the point where they can either get under the wave or they can find a place where they can get kind of out of the strongest wave action. So what I mean by under the wave is a lot of times you'll have big waves. That 2 or 3 foot area right under the surface will be pretty turbulent. It'll be rolling in motion. But if the fish get below that, so in that 4, 5, 6 foot depth range, it's not nearly as strong as you would think. And that generally is your key feeding area because the bait fish are going to get tossed and turned from those big waves. There are going to be a lot of them that get stuck kind of right in that area of, that transition from wave action to not really being in the wave action. And that's where you're going to have a lot of your fish. And that's also where you're going to have a lot of your kind of your turbid water, whether that's a mud line or whether that's just some clay or some kind of turbulent type water that's being roiled up by the wave action. You might have what looks like dirtier water on top, but when you get under that, it actually clears up quite a bit. So again, what that does is it presents a really good opportunity for the fish to feed as well. So the key for me a lot of times is keeping my bait right under that wave action and still above the fish, which are kind of looking up, trying to take advantage of bait fish that are having a tough time with the strong wave action. So because of that, I've got some very specific baits that I like to use here. Now, most of these are going to be fast moving baits because it can be pretty difficult to fish a slow moving bait in that rougher water, whether that's from boat positioning or whether that's just keeping your good contact with your line to your bait. It's just one of those things where a lot of times your faster moving baits are going to be key here. And I'll throw in a lot of times the fish that are in these situations are pretty much keying in on specifically on bait fish. So I really like to go with my shad imitating baits. And I say shad as a bait fish terminology because if you live up here in the North Country, we don't really have the shad that you have down south, but it still comes into play your bait fish, any sort of forage species. It could be perch, it could be bluegill, but generally speaking, I feel like it's a lot of those free roaming bait balls, which are some form of minnows or shad that generally become much better targets for the fish. I find a lot of times your bluegill and your perch will go deeper, they'll get down into the grass, and they tend to kind of just get out of some of these areas. So I like to go with shad imitating baits. One of the absolute best is just a spinner bait, a good old 1/2 ounce double willow spinner bait. This is one of my favorites. This is the white shad color, and I don't know what it is about this, but I love this color. I've had great days with it. It's just got a little bit of orange in the belly, but I feel like that is really key when you have that little bit of water discoloration. It seems like that orange really lets them key in. This is the Picasso and Visor Wire. Just a great spinner bait, but it's a really good true running spinner bait, which is something that you're going to want when you've got that bigger, rougher water. You actually want something that'll get below it and just run true versus kind of getting stuck up in the wave. That's not necessarily what you want. But a spinner bait like this is one of your absolute must-haves when these conditions, when you have sunny, windy conditions. Another one that I love is this Old Faithful right here. This is just the XR50, the old discontinued Xcalibur XRK50. It's the one knocker version, but the chrome black back. This thing has caught me so many fish in rough conditions. Whether it's largemouth, spotted bass, smallmouth, it's a really good bait for just burning through and getting right under the water, but burning it right under that wave action column of water generates a ton of bites. I absolutely love it. If I'm fishing in really rough conditions, a lot of times I'll upsize to like the 75 size, a 3/4 ounce, just to get me enough weight to get underneath that wave action. But your chrome colored lipless crankbaits can be absolutely dynamite under those conditions. One of the reasons is, that chrome reflects the sun so good, but when you talk about those big rolling waves, they break that sunlight up, so you get a lot of irregular flash coming off that chrome, which to me is a really good way to generate reaction strikes. Next up, a good old vibrating jig. This one right here, this is just the Old Faithful. This is the jackhammer. I've got it paired up with an electric shad power stinger by Berkeley here, just one of my favorite trailers. Again, I like the chrome blade in this case. Generally speaking, I don't like to have chrome blades or gold blades. I like to have painted blades on my vibrating jigs. But in this case, again, I like that irregular flash that I get in that rolling action. The electric shad on the power stinger is a great color because it's got a lot of that flake in it. Just generates a lot of interest from the fish. Another really good bait. And again, I will upsize as well. If the wave action is too strong, go to a bigger size vibrating jig, a 3/4 ounce, to get you down just underneath those big rolling waves if you need to. Another one of my absolute favorites, the Dime, because it's a speed crank. It works so well, runs so true. But I love to get a crankbait that can get me down under that action. So whether that's the Dime 6 or the Dime 10, the blue shad color, which is kind of a translucent color, is a dynamite one. A lot of times I'll actually take a little bit of chartreuse dye if I've got a marker pen, and I'll just go right down the sides just to give it a little bit of extra flash during those conditions. But a crankbait that runs true at a fast speed can be killer in these conditions. And again, generally speaking, I'm not looking at making bottom contact with this. Under these conditions, the fish are generally going to be up a little bit. So I like to run a crankbait over the tops of them. So even if you're fishing 14 foot of water, this guy will get down 10, 11 foot, and it'll stay above those fish, which generally are looking upward under those conditions, looking for an easy meal. But the blue shad Dime 6 or Dime 10 is one of my favorites. And then last but not least, a jerkbait. And I think a lot of people might think that that's a weird selection, but I love to have a jerkbait and I work it really, really fast. I don't really leave it, let it sit for long pauses. I'll pretty much jerk, pause, but I'm keeping it moving at a very quick pace. And again, I like to have one that's more translucent under these conditions, unless I've really got dirty water. So if I've got a solid mud line, I might go with more of a white color, a solid opaque color. But in this case, I really prefer more of a translucent color. This is the Northern Lights color. This is the Berkeley Stunna. Just one of my favorite jerk baits, and it works really well, again, under those conditions where you got to work it really fast. Because a lot of times you're moving very quickly with that boat. You're not necessarily always trying to hold in place. A lot of times you're covering maybe a break line or covering a flat, and you're really just trying to locate active fish, because that's what you have. When you've got rough water, sunny conditions, there are a lot of fish that are feeding in that time period. And for you, it's more about just coming to contact with those fish. And if you can get them to bite. But these are my absolute favorite baits under those conditions. I really enjoy fishing in those conditions, as physically demanding as it can be and as frustrating as it can be. If you need to retie or something, it's just tough to do that in the wind. But there's a lot of active fish that are aggressively feeding during those time periods, and these are some good baits that will help you put those fish in the boat. So let me know in the comment section, do you have some other baits you like to use under very windy conditions and sunny conditions? Let me know in the comment section. If you like this video too and you want me to do it for overcast windy conditions, I can do that as well. It's the bait selection is going to be pretty similar. It's going to be different colors for the most part. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed today's video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Stay tuned. New video coming out tomorrow.